From firebombed barbershops to political power plays, Australia's bikie gangs aren't just riding anymore. They're fighting for turf, clashing with rival syndicates and reshaping entire communities. Welcome to the OMG, Outlaw Motorcycle Gangs of Australia. Turf wars between gangs in Australia are intense, evolving conflicts driven by power, profit and pride. Here's how they play out. What is a turf war? A turf war is a violent struggle between rival gangs over control of a specific geographic area, often for drug distribution, extortion or influence. It's not just about territory, it's about dominance, reputation and survival. Key drivers for turf wars. Drug trade control. Gangs fight to dominate lucrative drug markets, especially methamphetamines and cocaine. Reputation and retaliation. Violence often escalates from personal beefs or perceived disrespect, leading to cycles of revenge. Recruitment and expansion. Gangs use turf wars to assert dominance and attract new members, especially in marginalised communities. Real-world examples of some current ongoing wars. The Coffin Cheaters vs. the Finks, 2010 to present. WA Turf War began with a brawl at Kwinana Motorplex in Perth. Ongoing rivalry with multiple violent clashes, including shootings and arson. Police have made dozens of arrests, but tensions persist. In southeast Queensland, the Mongols and the Finks are locked in a brutal turf war. Daylight bashings, firebombed storefronts. Police say there's an attack on site order between the clubs. Mongols vs. Rock Machine, New South Wales and Victoria. Newer conflict over drug routes and territory. Rock Machine vs. Rebels in Vic and Queensland. Rock Machine patched over ex-rebel members, escalating tensions. And the Comancheros vs. the Rebels, 2013 to present. A long-running turf war over drug routes and territory involved bombings, shootouts and mass arrests. Over 100 arrests linked to this conflict alone. Also in Perth, again at the Kwinana Motorplex, an assassination on Rebels WA ex-president Nick Martin in front of his family, allegedly at the request of ex-rebel David Pye, who patched to the Comancheros shortly before. Currently an ongoing case. Comancheros vs. Hells Angels. The Sydney Airport Brawl, 2009. A brutal public fight in the domestic terminal. Anthony Zervis, brothers of a Hells Angel member, was beaten to death with a metal pole in front of horrified passengers. This led to a national outcry and calls for tougher anti-bikie laws. And of course, the Comancheros vs. Bandito feud, going since the Milperra Massacre in 1984, which we covered in our episode 2. Ritualised violence. Turf wars often follow a ritualistic pattern: intimidation, escalation and retribution. These aren't random acts, they're culturally coded responses to perceived violations. Identity and territory as selfhood. For many bikies, turf isn't just geography, it's an extension of their identity. Losing ground feels like losing face, and defending it becomes a matter of personal and collective pride. Loyalty and legacy. Members are often fiercely loyal to their club's history in a region. A rival's encroachment isn't just a threat, it's an insult to the legacy that they've built, sometimes over decades. Masculine honour and retaliation. The hyper-masculine culture of outlaw motorcycle gangs means that perceived disrespect, like flying colours in another club's territory, can spark violent retaliation. These feuds are often less about strategy and more about proving dominance. Generational divide. Older members may seek to preserve traditional boundaries and codes of conduct, while younger, profit-driven recruits push for expansion. This internal tension can spill into external turf wars. Criminal market control. As clubs evolve into organised crime syndicates, turf becomes a business asset. Control over drug routes, extortion zones and laundering fronts. Cultural pride and criminal profit collide, making turf wars both emotional and strategic. In Melbourne, for instance, it's not just bikie wars, it's the tobacco wars. Arson attacks on stores that refuse to sell illicit cigarettes. These aren't just biker feuds, they're multi-million-dollar turf battles involving Middle Eastern crime syndicates, street gangs and cartel-linked networks. Law enforcement response. Task forces like Erebus, created to combat gang violence with raids, surveillance and arrests, community policing efforts to build trust and prevent youth from joining gangs, and controversial laws. New powers allow police to search suspects without warrants, raising concerns about profiling and civil liberties. Some mentionable takeovers. In Canberra, the Rebels Motorcycle Club was effectively taken over by the Finks. Around 2022 to 2023, the Rebels disbanded and rebranded as the All Brothers crew, which later patched over to the Finks, meaning they formally joined the rival club. This takeover reshaped turf dynamics and signalled a major power move in Australia's outlaw motorcycle gang scene. Several smaller-scale outlaw motorcycle gang takeovers have occurred across Australia, often quietly and locally. In New South Wales, some Nomads chapters have reportedly folded into the Comancheros, especially after leadership arrests or internal instability. In Queensland, Outlaws members have joined Bandidos chapters, typically following police pressure or clubhouse closures. Smaller clubs like Mob Shitters Motorcycle Club and Life and Death Motorcycle Club have seen members absorbed into larger gangs such as the Mongols, Rebels or Finks, often for better criminal access or protection. These takeovers are usually triggered by law enforcement pressure, leadership collapse or strategic expansion by dominant clubs. They may not grab headlines, but they quietly reshape turf dynamics and power structures across regions. Bikie gangs in Australia are no longer just fringe motorcycle clubs. They've evolved into fluid, profit-driven criminal syndicates that are actively reshaping the country's crime landscape. Here's how. Traditional loyalty and club identity have given way to opportunistic affiliations. Members now switch clubs based on profit potential, creating a networked criminal ecosystem rather than isolated gangs. Diversification of crime. Bikies are involved in drug trafficking, extortion, weapon smuggling, prostitution and money laundering. Many operate legitimate businesses, tattoo parlours, cafes, construction firms, as fronts for laundering illicit profits. Cross-border expansion. Gangs are expanding across state lines and internationally, partnered with cartels and other syndicates. Darwin, for example, has become a strategic hub due to its proximity to Southeast Asia and vulnerable border controls. Territorial fluidity and embedded influence. The old turf wars have evolved into strategic market control. Bikies now move into regions with weaker law enforcement or economic vulnerabilities, influencing local crime rates and public safety. Some reports suggest infiltration of law enforcement and legal systems, especially in regions like the Northern Territory, complicating investigations and prosecutions. Data-first perception. Despite their visibility, bikies account for less than 1% of organised crime offences in some jurisdictions. However, their symbolic power and media presence amplify their perceived threat, often overshadowing more covert criminal networks. In short, bikies are no longer just riding Harleys, they're riding the currents of organised crime, adapting faster than many enforcement strategies. Urban chaos versus rural control. In the cities, bikies dominate nightlife, gyms, tattoo parlours and logistic hubs. Violence is louder, more public, and one autumn day in March 2009, a murder, one of the most brazen and shocking public eruptions of bikie violence in Australia's history since Milperra. Anthony Zervas, brother to one of the Hells Angels members, was brutally killed during a violent brawl between the Comancheros and Hells Angels at Sydney's airport domestic terminal. The fight erupted in front of horrified passengers. The public nature and brutality of the attack shocked Australia. Just like Milperra, it marked a turning point in how outlaw motorcycle gangs were perceived, not just as rebellious outlaws, but as organised, dangerous criminal networks. Strike Force Raptor was launched shortly after as a specialist New South Wales police task force to combat bikie violence. Its mission: disrupt gang operations, enforce anti-consorting and firearm laws, shut down clubhouses and illegal businesses, target members with consequence-based policing. Raptor became a national model for aggressive, intelligence-led policing of our OMGs. It isn't just reserved for cities though, but in rural towns it's quieter, deeper. Bikies buy properties, run businesses, build loyalty. With fewer police and more economic vulnerability, they become shadow landlords. In some towns, they're seen as protectors. In others, predators. In the city, they're a threat. In the country, they're a fixture. The infiltration of bikie gangs into rural Australia isn't just about expanding turf, it's about reshaping entire communities. Highways as arteries of crime. Bikies use regional highways to move drugs, weapons and cash between major cities and isolated towns. Towns like Wagga Wagga, Mildura and Toowoomba have become key nodes due to their location on cross-country routes. Ice epidemic in the outback. Gangs are flooding rural areas with cheap methamphetamines, ice, targeting vulnerable populations, even children as young as 12. In places like Wagga, one arrest per day is linked to ice, and entire families, grandparents, parents and kids are caught in the cycles of addiction. Violence and turf wars. Rival gangs like Rebels, Finks and Mongols are clashing over control of these new markets, bringing extreme violence to towns that were once quiet. Acts include drive-by shootings, arson and intimidation of local businesses. Why rural towns? Well, less police presence, weaker anti-association laws and limited surveillance make these areas easier to operate in. Locals may be less familiar with bikie culture, making recruitment and intimidation more effective. This isn't just expansion, it's a redefinition of power. Bikies are turning forgotten towns into battlegrounds where patches replace politics and loyalty is enforced with fear. In Western Australia, rival bikie gangs are putting aside their differences. Why? They're challenging anti-gang laws that ban patches, tattoos and public gatherings. It's not just about crime anymore, it's about power, influence, image. And they're taking the fight from the streets to the courts. These aren't just biker gangs anymore, they're criminal syndicates, political actors, community influencers. They're shaping how we police, how we legislate and how we live. From the suburbs of Sydney to the streets of Maui, the war isn't just on the streets, it's in our laws, our towns and our headlines. If you're enjoying this series, give us a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that bell to stay aware when we are posting episode 6, Leather and Law.